very good evening to you. A week has elapsed, a lot has changed. We are not going to take you through what is happening in our country in terms of the politics. We are going to keep you updated about the business perspective. You are watching Biz First in Focus. I'm Saturang Hapalaji, and we have with us in the studio Mr. Rohan Masakorala, the CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for being here.
Good to be back with you.
As we've mentioned, there has been a lot of changes in terms of the politics, and I'm not going to ask you any political question, I promise. But I want to keep our viewers updated about the business perspective. I want your view on that as well. We've heard a lot of things after what we saw last week. We've seen exports slightly improving, the dollar to rupee slightly improving as well, and we've heard that many international developments happening around our country as well in terms of the international markets. Now I want to ask you, Mr. Masakorala, let's start off with the export factor. We've heard that exports have been doing great. Improvement in terms of the US markets, improvements, a slight drop in the EU market, but overall we've seen an improvement overall.
Yeah.
What is happening? What is that? Why are we seeing that trend?
Well, the export market has seen about over 3% growth overall on a per annum basis. In some sectors have double-digit growths. Apparel has also seen a huge growth to the United States, but a slowdown to the UK, European markets. But it's just the season that starts now for the apparel industry. So we are on track, if you look at the apparel industry, to go towards 5 billion plus this year. And also the sector that I also represent is the rubber manufacturing, that also has been doing well. So overall the export basket still remains small, but growth has been steady, especially even the service sector like IT. And we see the exports to GDP also has increased to over 16% of GDP, which was some time back around 13%. Those are good signs for exporters, and also the depreciation of the rupee helps exports. And of course we just started the launch and operations of the national export strategy.
Yes.
So there was some kind of positive outlook for exports, and so now we have to see markets are changing again, and macro things are also changing around the world. It's a turbulent environment anyway out there also. So we have to be very cautious that exports have to be focused very closely by government, because Sri Lanka is having a foreign exchange issue, and our focus should be exports. So to that end, numbers are good, but not satisfactory compared to some of the other countries' growth levels in exports, like Bangladesh and all these countries are still growing much faster than us. And also we have failed to still attract large scale manufacturing companies to set up in Sri Lanka. Maybe they are watching our country's situation, because any business you need stability in policy, consistency, and also reliability of what you do. So people have bad experiences in Sri Lanka, so obviously the investment side for exports have been slow. But that is the export story as far as now, so it has improved.
Mr. Masakorala, taking a look at the other side of things, we've seen that a lot of money is going out of the country in terms of the investments that are done. Foreign outflows have increased, several tweets being shared by various people involved with the former government as well. A lot of finger pointing done, but at the end of the day it boils down to the people who are in the industry. Why is there a lot of outflow?
Two things. Not a stable environment. Second thing, of course, the US economic factor, which is US is continuously increasing its interest rates. So that has been common to Asia, not only in Sri Lanka. Large amount of dollars have been flowing out of Asia to the US markets. So that pressure plus the local environment, foreigners would like to exit such markets. So that is why probably we have seen a net outflow of foreign funds in the stock market as well as other markets. So it's not a good situation for a country like us who are looking for dollars. And secondly, I think the current environment has created kind of a suspicion on the tourism industry, which is probably bringing $4 billion plus to the economy. and it's a vital part of our kind of export. We consider it as a service export.
Definitely.
Tourism is a service export. It has been growing tremendously fast, and we were achieving numbers. So that is another area that we will have to look at seriously, and policymakers, governments have to be all responsible to retain this business, because country's financial situation in foreign currency is not good. So these are areas that we have to really focus in business.
Mr. Maskurala, interesting point that you brought up was tourism, and the new government that came into be, the new minister said that tourism is not impacted in any way with the ongoing political situation in the country. And new ventures, he said that Swiss Air will begin routine charter flights from the 3rd of November. He spoke about cruises coming into Sri Lanka. A lot of new things were mentioned at a speech that the new government, at a press briefing rather, that the new government carried out. What I want to ask you is, now when these things come in, and when there is a situation like this in the political arena in the country, will they have the necessary impact, the good impact that the people want, or will it just die down after a few days? How do you think it will
I mean, whatever unfold? That has been promised to come, and they didn't decide on the 26th of October that is to come. There would have been negotiations. So there was no wrong signals from Sri Lanka as such. So whatever that was coming is a process. These things don't come overnight. You have to work very hard even to get a new customer, right? Exporter has to work very hard. Similarly, the tourism sector would have worked continuously since the end of the war actually to bring in the systems back into normalcy. So that cannot be identified as a continuation. We have to wait and see the current position, because already some of the countries have issued travel warnings to Sri Lanka, which is not a good thing. At a time when Lonely Planet said Sri Lanka is the best place in 2019, and then we have a situation where travel warnings, and especially the countries that we have tourists coming in are watching the situation. So investment for tourism, all those things can be have to be watched. It's probably an area that gets hit first if the environment in Sri Lanka is not stable. So what we need as a business community is very stable environment, stable policies, and sustainability of those policies. If that is not the case, we are very vulnerable, and it's sad that if we lose momentum on tourism due to political disturbances in this country, that is not going to help the politicians nor the citizens of this country. And I hope that these things are seriously looked at when statements are being made and political jargon is spoken. It damages our country's image. These are long-term repercussions.
Definitely. Yeah. Mr. Maskurala, with that we have to go in for a short commercial break. We are in discussion about the current economical and the business situation in the country after what we saw last week in terms of the politics. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. You are watching Newsfirst in Focus. Before we went into the break, we were in discussion with Mr. Rohan Maskurala, the CEO of the Shippers Academy in Colombo, about the current economic situation in the country after the political developments that we saw in the past week. Mr. Maskurala, we spoke about the export sector, we spoke about the new projects that are to come into the country in terms of tourism as well. Now I want to move your attention to the international arena. We've seen, as you mentioned, there is a problem with the INR, the Indian rupee as well. We've seen the Indian rupee dropping, and we saw a okay situation for a while, but now again we've seen the same happening that is happening to our country as well. With all of this happening, I just want to focus on India for a bit. We saw this talk of the East Terminal being taken up by the political arena very strongly in the past, just before the government change happened. Now with all of this, the fact that the harbour is required for India, and that the reshipments of India happens to our Colombo port, with all of this happening, where should we stand in terms of building up businesses with India and Sri Lanka at the moment? Because the President also mentioned this yesterday.
Yeah, out of the Indian container throughput, Colombo handles about 18% of total India's container throughput. That accounts to nearly 75% of our transshipment. That 18% accounts to 75%. So, Indian shipping companies or ship owners, cargo owners, exporters, importers are the ones who are diverting their cargo through Sri Lanka. Now, it is probably not their decision, it is the decision of the ship owners who decides to pick up the cargo at the best location. So, we always talk about Sri Lanka as a good location for the especially the eastern Indian coast and the southern part of it. Most of our volumes come from there, which get transshipped into bigger vessels in Colombo. So, obviously, India was probably slow in investing in Sri Lanka, because we started consortiums in 1999, that is the South Asia Gateway Terminal, with Sri Lanka Ports Authority, John Keel's Holdings, Maersk Line, Evergreen and few others. So, at that time India was not interested in Sri Lanka, probably they did not see far enough. India has probably been always late in terms of Sri Lanka in terms of business. They only saw, in my opinion, the problem we had in the northeast, and they were trying to solve that rather than seeing Sri Lanka as a business opportunity, whereas China has seen Sri Lanka as a business opportunity. So, lately I think India is now keen to invest in Sri Lanka, and East Terminal is that story. In fact, East Terminal was advertised for request for proposals about 2 years back, when Minister Ranatunga was the minister, and there were proposals, and cabinet would have approved that, and now we see that there is a turnaround on that policy also in terms of not bringing in India or any partner to develop the East Terminal. I do not agree with that personally as a shipping person, because we should build the ports with international partners. That is how we build a hub port. Now, we have always, I come from the shipping fraternity, we have always requested that Port Authority should be changing its model.
Right.
Now, Singapore has a very good model called the Maritime Ports Authority and the PSA. PSA is the business arm of the Singapore government.
Right.
Maritime Ports Authority sets the rule, so they do not get engaged in business. Now, in Sri Lanka, the problem is the Sri Lanka Ports Authority is the owner, operator and the regulator, and they are in business. So, there is no level playing field for everybody. So, we have been asking governments to continuously change this, so that Sri Lanka Ports Authority become an independent body like in Singapore, where it can invest in terminals with partners. So, this model has not been adopted, and there is always this nationalistic feeling that port should be ours kind of thing. So, that probably led to this change, which is not a good model. What happens in Singapore is the PSA, Port of Singapore Authority, and the MPA together develop the infrastructure, and then they give it to management companies to run it on short term basis on the best deal that they get as a country. So, we have neglected these areas after creating of the Ports Authority in 1979. We have not done many changes except for the privatization of SAGT and then the CICT to China. So, yes, there is geopolitical interest in Sri Lankan ports because it is located at a strategic location. So, that is what India's interest in Sri Lanka is, and that is quite reasonable for India to have an interest in Sri Lanka. If we have given China so much in terms of ports, I think we should give our cargo, people who send our cargo to this country, more recognition, give them also part of the business to be partners of Sri Lanka, which will be good for long term business stability of Sri Lankan ports. That is my opinion.
Geopolitics plays a vital role, and we have seen this coming into play in the past week or so as well. Now, if I shift your attention from India to once again USA, as you mentioned earlier, they have been raising their interest rates for a while, and this is resulting in a lot of money that is in our market to go back to USA as well. Now, with that happening, we have however seen an appreciation in the rupee. Just 3 or 4 days ago, we have seen the rupee the value of the rupee coming down to 175.82. With that, do you think there is an advantage to the people in Sri Lanka? You mentioned that the exporters will have some sort of advantage. How will this slight decrease in the value that we pay for the rupee affect?
If you look at the world currency markets, currencies are floated free, right? If it is really bad, only central banks tend to intervene. So, it is not on that particular day when the rupee came down from the selling rate of 177 to 175. Now, it has gone back to 176.
Yes.
that is market fluctuations. Now, that particular day globally all the currencies were stronger against the US dollar.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right. The pound actually has gone from 1.28 to 1.30. It's a very big jump. Right. Australian dollar up by 250 basis points. So, that is the global phenomenon. We got to understand these currencies are based on global supply and demand. Right. It had nothing to do with a local situation.
Right.
If one monitors currency, because I am a person who monitors currency, and I know I realized that that particular day all the currencies in Asia although picked up, but again some of them went down. So, this has nothing special. US dollar will continue to, especially towards the end of the year, US dollar tends to again weaken. By December or so, the US dollar tends to weaken. The reason behind is that they have bought their oil for the Christmas season, the goods have been ordered for the holiday season, the shipments have already finalized. So, those very large macroeconomic considerations have to be taken into. Plus, of course, the Iranian oil issue has been already factored into the market.
Right.
Everybody knew 5th November Iran was going to go into sanctions and 8 countries were going to be released out of it. So, these are macroeconomic global issues. What is important to Sri Lanka is Sri Lanka should not be intervening in the currency too much by meddling with supply and demand.
Right.
That is the truth. Right. If you in a free economy, if we believe in a free economy, we should not be meddling in the supply and demand of currencies either. It can lead to repercussions later. Right. So, as we want to export more, depreciation is okay. Tourism inflow, if it is coming, the people will get more rupees. The problem is our oil bill and the imports. So, if the oil settles, oil has come down actually, it is 72, 73 from 86 high. Yes. So, if the oil bill comes down globally, then Sri Lanka will have a better forex situation compared to our import bill. So, these are very macroeconomic things, we can't just link overnight, but things like stock market reactions, yes, sometimes overnight we can identify changes.
With that, Mr. Maskorala, we have to go into another short commercial break. When we come back, Mr. Maskorala spoke about the Colombo Stock Exchange as well. We have a few questions to get Mr. Maskorala's answer to. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. You're watching Newsfirst in Focus. We are in discussion with Mr. Rohan Maskorala, the CEO of the Colombo Shippers Academy. Mr. Maskorala, before we went in, we spoke about the international perspective as well. You mentioned the Colombo Stock Exchange and how stocks can have maybe a very extreme impact with regard to what is happening in the country. And we've seen situation in the Colombo Stock Exchange in the recent few weeks as well. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but in your perspective as a businessman, a person who is involved in the business arena, these changes and the trends that we see in the stock exchange, are they actually trends and changes that people should be worried about?
People should be worried because it gives some kind of indications. It can be various indications, it can be manipulations also. So, what is important is our stock exchange is very small compared to even the economy. So, large amount of the population really does not understand how the stock exchange works, but what is important is whether we are getting new listings in the country, whether we are getting foreign inflows as a plus instead of a negative. Those are the key indicators that we can see how the global investors look at Sri Lanka. What is important for Sri Lanka as a global destination to becoming a financial hub is how foreign inflows happen into our stock markets. What can happen locally can be always questioned, people, because we have had past also experiences that stock markets can be various things are there have been in the media of stock markets being manipulated basically. Yes. So, that we have to be careful, but what is important is the foreign inflows and the new listings of stock markets. Then you can, if you can see a steady stock market with continuous new listings coming in, that is good for the country. In a free economy, those are good indicators, but what I have seen is that net foreign exchange losses are there.
Yes.
So, that is not a good thing because we need the dollars, and again one reason would be of course going to the US, some of the investments again going back to the US because of the strong economy, extremely strong, it is worryingly strong actually. When a country gets overheated also, that is worrying to the rest of the world.
Definitely.
There are opportunities in that, but there are short term very huge negative factors for Asian countries, which is one of the vulnerable Asian countries is Sri Lanka.
Mr. Masakorala, with whatever is happening in the country, we've seen the international aid that is being coming into the country being stopped, especially from Japan as well. We've seen a media release sent out. Now, when this happens, we are a country that is dependent on all these aid programs as well. What will be the impact be immediately, and if you take a look at a bit into the midterm, the long run as well?
Yeah, it will affect economic growth, it will affect our infrastructure, recovery of what areas we need to go in very fast. Yes, we are quite dependent on international support. This is not good, and that is bad political management as far as I can see. If the international organizations start stopping whatever the support they are giving, that I think has to be addressed by the government of the day. To put things right and get the confidence of those countries to support. We are still a very poor country. Definitely. And our people are quite poor, so we need these investments and to develop infrastructure and projects. I think that is a very bad signal if they are going to hold on until we settle this political dust. That signal has to be given by the responsible politicians to the world that we are all here for good governance.
Mr. Masakorala, matters like the IMF program that is going in parallel with the economy of our country, matters like GSP plus provided by international bodies are also having a huge amount of impact on the country's economy, and we've seen hints being made by various politicians that we might be not having those in the future, and the EU has actually put out a media release advisory as well to say something of that sort, where the GSP is in a problematic situation. Now, as a person who is involved in the shipping industry, when the GSP has an impact, we've seen what it has done to the past in our country. Now, what again we are coming to that situation because we didn't have a plan B back then, we don't have a plan B right now as well, isn't it?
Market access doesn't have plan A's and B's. It depends on how your foreign policy and foreign relationships work. What we need is to, if we need to export or re-export or be a trading hub like Singapore or Hong Kong or Dubai, we need markets. We need two things. We need investors to come and set up, and we need those goods to go into various markets. Yeah. Now, if those markets starts putting in various barriers directly or indirectly, we as a country gets hit, and that is what happened to us in 2009. Our exports of apparel, the biggest sector, was very marginally growing, and they were losing market, and buyers were not having confidence in the Sri Lankan supply chain until they got it back. So, getting these things are not easy either. So, it is a responsibility of the government to retain market access. Otherwise, where do you export? Where do you export? 21 million people can't sustain this economic growth. What we want, we need external markets. So, I think we need to have for that good relations and clear cut policies on foreign policy, so that our businesses can actually work with those countries. The businesses are helpless in a situation where political situations interfere, and it's kind of a sanction, no? Right? If the international community is not happy with what we are doing, they can put sanctions. That has happened to Iran, that has happened to many countries, that happened to Turkey. Right? So, we need to balance all these acts carefully before we take very drastic decisions, expecting the international community to react positively for those things. So, that we have to be very careful. We are working in a globalized economy, and Sri Lanka totally depends on the external world, whether it is tourism or exports or workers overseas remittance. Right? All those things we depend on external factors totally. What are we doing here? It's a small economy, extremely small economy. If we don't have those kinds of incomes coming in properly, where are we going to end up? We'll be poorer than what we are today. Right? But countries like Bangladesh, India, all are growing at 7-8%. That is what we want to reach. Yes. To do that, we need to work with the international community and get their markets and get their support with tourism and investments. Otherwise, we will have problems.
Thank you, Mr. Masakorala, for joining us today and talking to us about the current business situation, and in terms of the economy, what is happening with the political developments that we've seen in the past week. We will join you next week as well. Hopefully, things in terms of at least the business perspective may be settled, and we'll have a new topic to talk to you about next week. We will join you once again next week, same place, same time, with an interesting guest like Mr. Mas Korala to keep you updated about the business situation. I've been Chaturang Haparachi. Take care.